Not a lot of dialogue, you say. But there's another one, but that one has 13,000 words.
Alrighty.
This fanfiction is called...
Wait, hold on. No, marker. I made a mark.
Can I do it now?
Yes.
This fanfiction is called A Tight...
Are you serious?
No, it's not called Are You Serious? It's called A Tight Squeeze by Fight the Heavens. Summary. After settling down with Laylee in Shipwreck Creek... What? Again? It's again Shipwreck Creek, Dario. Yuka... Is it... Wait, is it more Yuka or UK? Yuka. Yuka?
It's Yuka.
Yuka. As in ukulele.
Yeah, ukulele.
Yeah, I always pronounce it wrong, I guess. Yuka begins to develop a strange, new feelings for his lifelong friend. As it turns out, she's wanted something more with him for quite some time. A fluffy, cutesy, and intensively explicit ukulele one-shot.
One shot?
Yuka blazed down the makeshift raceway created by the dried-up riverbed in Tribal Stack Tropics, curled up tightly into a ball. His purple-bat companion, Laylee, danced atop him, carefully keeping her footing as he tumbled forwards. He weaved through the turns of the riverbed and through the marked hoops, Laylee shouting out directions of where to go between rapid breaths. He knew Nimble, the helmet-sporting cloud who had challenged him to this race, would be right on his tail. So he raced, further down the track, cutting his turns as tight as he could. Eventually, he crossed the finish line, leaving Nimble far behind him. He rolled out onto the grass beside the riverbed, triumphant. He emerged from his tight ball, momentarily launching Laylee into the air, who flapped her wings as she settled back down to perch on top of his head. He could hear her fast, hard breaths, feeling the heaving of her chest against his head, even as he himself panted to recover from the effort of the race. Nimble showed up at the finish line after a bit longer and took her loss with forced grace. As agreed, the pagey they had been competing for was handed over, and the duo walked away from the cloud satisfied with their victory. Laylee yawned loudly from atop Yuka's head.
Hey, you think we can find a spot around here to sit and take a rest?
She asked, still sounding a bit out of breath.
I'm beat after that.
Yuka was relieved at her question, needing a break himself, but not wanting to be the first to speak up.
Yeah,
He responded.
I could definitely use some rest too.
After a few minutes of searching, they happened upon a nice grassy ledge behind one of the many large rock formations in Tribal Stack Tropics, shielded from view of the rest of the area and overlooking the edge of the home world. Yuka slumped onto the ground, leaning his back against the rock formation, thankful for the shade it provided. Laylee left her perch on his head and flopped onto the grass on her back a few feet from him, spreading her wings out beside her. Yuka gazed out at the distant mountains, separated from them by a vast stretch of nothingness. He sighed, then looked over at his bat companion, resting on the ground. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, her eyes closed as she relaxed. Yuka gazed out at the distant mountains, separated from them by a vast stretch of nothingness. He sighed, then looked over at his bat companion, resting on the ground. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, her eyes closed as she relaxed.
Hello, small friend. Nimble feeling blocked up. Look what's happened.
Eyes.
Frozen. Whole lake has frozen over. Tiny friends could find something to warm Nimble.
He reflected on the past few days. Laylee had been his sole friend and traveling companion for as long as he could remember. Most people were put off by her upfront snarkiness and sometimes flat-out rudeness, but Yuka was able to look past these traits and had formed a tight bond with her in spite of them. He couldn't honestly name another person in the world that he was closer with. Their relationship had been as such for a long time. Years and years of being extremely close friends, nothing more. But things had become different ever since him and Laylee settled down in Shipwreck Creek. Before then, the two had been mostly nomadic, always going to different places, chasing new adventures, never really having a home to return to. But now they did! It had been fun renovating the beach shipwreck with Laylee, giving the place a fresh coat of paint and decorating it to make it a home of their own. It was nice to have a consistent place for them to lay their heads at night, usually out under the stars up on the top deck. Many nights they'd spend simply chatting, pointing out constellations in the sky, before they both drifted off to sleep next to each other. That, combined with their new adventure, chasing after the lost pages of their book claimed by Capital B, it made the pair grow closer than ever. But something else had changed with his newfound closeness. Strange new emotions had been welling up inside Yuka, feelings that he wasn't sure what to make of. Challenge fail! Lately, he'd found himself staring at Laylee for prolonged lengths of time, his mind in an odd, almost blank state. He'd been laughing at her jokes much more often, even at times when she wasn't meaning to be funny. He felt comforted when she was near, much more than he ever had before, and strangely hollow when she was away. He fumbled his words when talking to her a lot more, feeling heat go to his face and becoming more and more flustered when any conversation went on for long. It had taken him a while to understand exactly what the feeling he had was, full of naivety when it came to matters like this, but eventually it dawned on him. He had fallen in love with Laylee! The revelation had terrified him. He knew it could ruin their friendship. If he confessed and Laylee didn't feel the same way, he couldn't take that risk, and even if he did, he hadn't the slightest clue as to how he would go about confessing his feelings. And if he did confess, and she rejected him, he knew he would never be able to look her in the eye again. So for the last few days, as the two ran around Ivory Towers and explored the tome worlds contained within, it felt like there was a wedge between Yuka and Laylee. He was on edge constantly, you know, the web browser Edge. Not wanting to overstep any boundaries or show his feelings lest it destroy their friendship, but at the same time desperately craving the ability to speak freely on his feelings and have Laylee love him back. He was stuck! Yuka's thoughts were interrupted as Laylee rolled over onto her stomach, flopping down into the grass with a greatly exaggerated sigh.
Hey, Buck Breath!
She said, her voice slightly muffled with her face pressed into the grass.
I'm feeling a bit sore from all that racing. Mind massaging my back a little?
Yuka froze. Being so conscious of boundaries made him very wary of a situation like this. Though he longed for physical contact with Laylee, he was hesitant about going this far, scared of doing something wrong. But she was the one who asked, so it was okay, right? A casual platonic back massage is just something someone does for a friend. That's what Yuka tried to reassure himself with before responding.
Sure. No problem.
Ooh. He kind of sounded tired there. He stood up.
I'm trying to do this voice, it's very hard actually.
He stood up and walked over to Laylee, his heart beginning to beat faster. He stepped between her legs and came down to kneel behind her, staring at her back, not sure where to start. His eyes traced along its length, seeing the edges of her shoulder blades and the lightly defined outlines of her muscles through her fur. He swallowed nervously, then reached his hands out to place them gingerly on her shoulders, rubbing his thumbs lightly on the muscles between them. Her fur was soft and enticing under his touch.
Like this?
He asked. Laylee let out a satisfied sigh.
Yes. A bit harder if you could.
She said with a slight groan. Yuka pressed his fingers into Laylee's back with more force at her command, prompting another pleased groan from her. Encouraged, he worked his fingers harder against her muscles, slowly moving his way down her back. Laylee continued to vocalize her enjoyment, some of her groans becoming higher pitched and more questionable in nature. Yuka pressed on, trying to focus on his current task and not let his mind wander too far. Such focus was difficult to maintain as he felt up her muscles and her form, his hands grabbing at her small body while she produced soft, breathy, satisfied noises. It was all leading his mind to dangerous places, places he had been trying desperately to steer clear of. Her fur was soft beneath his fingers. and he could feel the rise and fall of her body, becoming more pronounced as her breasts became heavier. Laylee exhaled into the grass, greatly enjoying her massage. The relief on her muscles was good, yes. She hadn't lied about being a bit sore, but she found greater pleasure in who it was that was giving her the massage. The fact that it was Yuka's large hands caressing her body had such force, yet he was still so ginger with her small frame. She was getting quite worked up, thinking about what else those hands could do. She knew it was selfish, having Yuka do this to her for her own pleasure. It was probably driving him wild. Laylee had, of course, noticed his strange behavior recently. He had become a bumbling, nervous wreck around her, and it was quite obvious something was up with him. It didn't take much critical thinking for her to realize he'd fallen for her. Let me drink. The realization had sparked many ideas in her mind, opening up so many opportunities she had abandoned long ago. The truth was, ever since the two had met, Laylee had wanted a more physical relationship with Yuka, but her not-so-subtle advances in that direction had been fruitless for a long time. The naive lizard was simply too oblivious to catch on to even her more egregious attempts at seducing him. And she didn't want to just confess outright, to make her intentions entirely clear. She wasn't even sure if he'd felt the same attraction back to her, so she played it cautiously, waiting for even a hint that he wanted her back, so the relationship could progress organically. But no such hint ever came. So she dropped that possibility early on, finding joy in their close friendship instead. Content for the time being with just her fantasies and the occasional opportunity to ogle his body. But now that he had been showing interest, she wanted him even more desperately than ever. This massage was the most physical contact she'd really ever gotten with him, and it felt so good. She wished Yuka would take it further, do more than just rub her aching muscles. She wasn't trying to hide her pleasure at all. Surely he would get the hint. Get the hint? Much to her disappointment, Yuka was not, in fact, getting the hint. He continued to move his massage down her back, struggling internally. His mind was continuing to wander in dangerous directions, Laylee's growing moans only serving to fuel the fire. He tried desperately to force down a more physical reaction to this. If he got hard just from this massage and Laylee saw it, what would she think? He could not let this happen! Despite this, something prevented him from stopping. He had probably done a good enough massage at this point, but his hands continued to grip Laylee's body, unable to pull themselves away. Besides, it seemed like she was still enjoying herself. Why deprive her of a little more contact? Though he tried to take his time, eventually Yuka's hands found themselves on Laylee's lower back, rubbing the muscles just above her small rump. Though not super pronounced, there was still a pair of rounded, soft lumps down above her thighs. He moved down, then hesitated, his hands floating just above Laylee's ass. Did she want him to go this far down? Surely the muscles here would be sore too, but he wasn't sure how she would feel about him massaging such an area. He tried to speak, then noticed his throat was dry and scratchy from his nerves. He cleared it, then asked unsteadily,
Do you need me to go, lower?
Laylee was barely able to suppress a giggle at Yuka's insistence.
Yeah, if you'd be so kind.
She answered, trying to make her request sound as nonchalant as possible. With explicit permission, how? Yuka lowered his hands down until they were planted firmly on Laylee's cheeks. He needed the softer flesh with the same force as he had her muscles, mesmerized by the way it moved under his hands. Laylee's moans amplified as Yuka firmly groped her ass. She hoped his fingers would find their way just a bit lower, down between her thighs and over an area that was begging for some attention by now. She could feel herself practically dripping with arousal, the wetness in her loins accompanied by an intense heat. Yuka tried his best to continue the massage in a respectful and innocent manner. Well, As respectful and innocent as it could be when he was feeling up Laylee's ass like this, he focused his efforts on what he hoped were her muscles, though it was difficult to tell, inexperienced as he was with giving massages. But if Laylee's noises were any signal, he must have been doing a great job. With his hands fully cupped around her cheeks, he idly pulled and separated them, not even fully aware of his actions. When he did, he caught a glimpse down between Laylee's thighs and gasped at what he saw. Of course, Yuka had seen Laylee's pussy before. It's not like she wore anything to cover the area, so it was fully on display pretty much all of the time. But he did try his best to be respectful and not stare too much. But now it looked different, and Yuka couldn't resist from examining further. He held her cheeks apart to get a closer look. He noticed her tight, puckered hole right between her cheeks with her pussy just below it. He could see the intricacies of its folds, spread slightly apart by his hands as well, though slightly obscured by his top-down angle. What wasn't obscured, however, and what fully piqued Yuka's interest was just how wet the area was. Laylee's pussy and the area surrounding it was glistening, coated in a transparent liquid. What's more, Yuka could also see a small puddle of the liquid pooling on the grass beneath. He blushed. He knew that women could have a response like this when they were aroused, but he didn't expect it to be this much, especially from Laylee. She must really be enjoying this massage. Despite his best efforts up to this point, Yuka felt the blood rushing down between his legs and at the side before him.
Oh, no, no.
He thought to himself, but he could only watch as his cock began to unsheath itself and grow rapidly before him. Within seconds, he was hard as a rock, his cock standing proudly outwards, twitching slightly. He panicked internally, praying Laylee wouldn't turn around until this issue went away. Unaware of Yuka's current struggle, Laylee felt as he pulled her cheeks apart. She hoped he was getting a good look between her legs. She imagined his expression as he saw her aroused pussy, so wet just from his touch. She waited for him to do something, to go even further. Without even thinking, Yuka's hands moved lower, cupping the bottoms of Laylee's cheeks with his palms. With his thumbs on the insides of her thighs, he continued to rub and squeeze, and with every motion he could see her lips separate, then close back up. He saw a small trickle of her arousal run down her lips and join the growing puddle in the grass. Laylee made no attempt to hide her sheer pleasure at this, letting her gasps and moans fully escape her lips. She wanted those thumbs on her pussy, rubbing her lips in the same way he was rubbing her ass. Almost out of instinct, she arched her back, raising her butt up to give Yuka better access. This movement reassured Yuka slightly, though he still felt nervous. Was she aware of the effect she was having on him? Would she be mad if she turned around and saw him like this? He decided the best thing to do right now would be to keep Laylee satisfied until he could get his own physical reaction under control. That goal was becoming increasingly difficult, as Laylee raising her butt up to meet his hands had given him a better view of her pussy, and he felt his cock throb as he stared at the area. There was a thick strand of arousal strung between it and the puddle below, and when he spread her lips apart, he had a full view into her most sensitive area. Irresistibly drawn closer, he moved his thumbs up the insides of Laylee's thighs and closer to her lips, feeling her fur getting warmer as he inched his way inwards. He waited to gauge her reaction before going further. Feeling he was towing the line here, Laylee smiled in anticipation as she felt Yuka's thumbs rub closer and closer to the source of the wet heat between her legs.
Yes, that's it, keep going.
She pushed her butt closer to him, encouraging him to go further. After a brief moment of hesitation, Yuka slid his thumbs up and onto the sides of Laylee's pussy, pressing lightly into her plump folds. The skin there was hot to the touch and slick from her flutes. He pulled to the side and stretched her hole open, feeling his cock throb yet again at such an intimate view. He began to move his thumbs in small circles with light pressure, spreading and closing her lips with each cycle. Laylee let out a deep animalistic moan as her pussy finally received the attention it was begging for. She dropped all innocent pretenses, letting her tongue loll out into the grass as she gasped and panted with no reservations. She let the pleasure consume her mind, content to let Yuka take it from here. Yuka was surprised at Laylee's immediate lewd reaction to his touch. Is this what she wanted the whole time? Keeping up the circular motions, he pressed harder into her lips, coaxing more lewd flutes from her entrance along with another sharp gasp from her, followed by a long, low moan. He continued this way, his thumb sliding easily over her folds with her juices for lubrication. He settled into an easy rhythm, matching that of Laylee's heavy breaths. Laylee's body felt like it was on fire! Led by instinct, she gyrated her hips, pushing them back to match Yuka's movements. She hoped he was enjoying this as much as she was. I need to change my position here.
Your bypass?
What?
Bypass with bypass?
Change my position! Cause my legs need to stretch a bit.
My
They're
leg.
broken now. I have broken legs.
She hoped he was enjoying this as much as she was. The sight and feeling of Laylee practically squirming with pleasure under his hands exacerbated Yuka's current struggle. He looked down to see his cock still erect between his legs, feeling harder than he'd ever had before. It begged for attention, and Yuka fought the urge to take a hand of Laylee to rub the stiff flesh. Every time his thumbs parted her hold and gave him a peek inside, he felt a pang of arousal and a throb between his legs, so strong it was almost painful. He could feel his breaths rising to nearly the same level as Laylee's, and his face felt hot. Daring to go further and beginning to lose himself in a horny daze of his own, he momentarily paused his circles before slowly pushing his thumbs into Laylee's pussy. They slid in with ease thanks to her flutes, stopping once they were fully inside. He could feel her wetness along with an intense and fury heat. Laylee's whole body shuddered as Yuka's thumb slipped into her, letting out an uncontrolled higher-pitched moan. She pushed her hips back harder, wanting him as far inside her as possible. Yuka began lightly rubbing his thumbs along the inside of Laylee's pussy, pushing outwards. As he did so, he spread her pussy even further than before, and the sight deep inside with his thumbs soaking in her heat sent another powerful pang of pressure between his legs, causing his cock to practically bounce upwards. He could see a thin string of pre-cum hanging out of the tip now, stretching down to lay in the grass besides Laylee's own puddle of arousal.
Yes, this is a fan fiction, Rick. Be prepared. Also, welcome to the stream.
Where? Who?
Raccoon Mario.
Hello, Raccoon Mario. Pleasure coursed through Laylee's entire body as Yuka began rubbing deep inside her. His thumbs were so big inside of her, stretching her out wide open. It felt so good to finally get the pleasure she'd wanted for so long from him. She felt her climax rapidly approaching, anticipating her release as she let Yuka push her further towards the edge. Something similar was beginning to happen within Yuka's own body. Though he hadn't so much as grazed a hand by his cock, pre-cum continued to drip from the tip as he felt it throb harder with pleasure. He couldn't stop it. The sight of Laylee squirming below him, the feeling of his thumb soaked in her heat. Those sensations alone were driving him towards finishing at the same rate as Laylee. With a few final rubs from Yuka, Laylee finally reached the edge and came! She had nothing. She had nothing back. She half groaned, half moaned through the waves of pleasure racking her body. Her legs shook, and her face flushed with a renewed and intense heat. Behind her, Yuka saw and felt her pussy twitch under Twitch.tv? Twitch under his touch as she cried out. A new flood of her juices soaked his thumbs and dripped out to the grass below. Inexperienced as he was, he knew enough to recognize that what was happening, that Laylee had reached orgasm under his touch. That was enough for Yuka as well. He felt the pleasure and pressure build up between his legs until he, too, was over the edge. Without thought, his muscles squeezed and a thick rope of cum shot out from the tip of his cock, landing stretched over Laylee's whole back. More followed, Yuka feeling pangs of pleasure with each rope that came forward, joining the rest and coating Laylee's backside. All he could do was watch and let out a groan of his own as he blew his load in unison with her orgasm. Laylee hardly even noticed the wet warmth of Yuka's cum coating her back, still lost in her own pleasure as her orgasm ran its course, her lips trembling. Each successive wave of Yuka's own orgasm became weaker and weaker, until the ropes of cum dwindling down to mere dribbles, and the sensation faded out entirely. Yuka leaned back on his knees, out of breath and quite hot in the face. He looked down at Laylee and was immediately mortified, his mind cleared and thinking straight after this release. The majority of his load had landed directly on Laylee. Her entire back was covered with long distinct ropes of his sticky cum, one particularly powerful burst having gone far enough to land on the back of her head, and then some into the grass beyond. He could see it already soaking into her fur, some beginning to run down the sides of her body. A good amount had coated her butt too, right by his hands and his thumbs, which were still embedded deep inside her. He quickly pulled them away, prompting one last tired moan from Laylee, and a pit of guilt formed fast in his stomach. He instinctively slapped a hand over his mouth in shock as he surveyed the situation further, unintentionally smearing a healthy amount of the juices from Laylee's arousal on his face. He tasted it on his lips, lightly sweet and salty, and he could smell it, hating to admit how good the scent was. His mind raced, his thoughts jumbling and all tripping over each other.
What have I done?
This was the end of their relationship, he was sure of it. There was no way Laylee would forgive him for this, for defiling her in such a way. Let alone confessing his feelings for her, this was many steps further, blasting through every single boundary there could be. Still unaware of Yuka's reactions, Laylee relaxed her body as the last waves of her orgasm washed over her, feeling very satisfied indeed.
I have got to ask him for more massages in the future.
She sighed contentedly, only now beginning to notice the warm wetness on her body as something dripped down her butt and the sides of her back.
What is that? Wait, did he? No way!
A grin came to her face as she thought about what had landed on her back.
Well, I'm glad he was able to enjoy that with me.
She slowly pushed herself up with one of her wings and swung her neck around to look at Yuka. Her grin immediately dropped as she saw the mortified expression on his face, staring at her back. He made eye contact with her, and she saw a greater fear in his eyes than she had ever seen before. As they locked eyes, Yuka's guilt doubled. He tried to speak, rushing his words out without even really knowing what to say, what he could say.
Laylee, I'm so sorry.
He couldn't bear to look at her anymore, to look at his mistakes. He turned around, his back to her, and hung his head in hands, not caring anymore about what he was rubbing onto his face. Tears sprang to his eyes. Laylee's heart sank as she saw Yuka in such distress. She suddenly felt like she had misread the entire situation. She cursed herself internally, knowing she should have taken things slower, especially with someone like Yuka. He wasn't prepared to go that far that quick. She knew how he was. She found herself feeling guilty and selfish. She quickly got herself to her feet, marveling momentarily at the size of the puddle she'd made. She placed the wing gingerly on Yuka's back. Not sure of what she could say right now. She felt his muscles clench under her touch, and it nearly broke her heart to see him like this. Despite his hands covering his face and the choked sobs escaping him, Yuka tried to speak, tried to say anything at all to apologize. Not knowing even where to begin, he opened his mouth and blubbered.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I swear I wasn't trying to. I'm so sorry, Laylee. I'm so...
His blabbering was cut off as he choked out another sob.
Hey, buddy. I'm not bad, I promise.
Lily said, trying her best to calm down her friend.
I get it. I was pushing it a little by having you do that to me. I should have asked if you were okay with it too.
She sighed, feeling like her words weren't coming out in the right way.
I mean, if it's any consolation to you, I did enjoy that, truly. Even the, bit at the end.
Some of Yuka's worries faded as Lily spoke, still feeling bad about the situation, but hopeful that he didn't actually screw up as much as he thought. He spoke, wiping some of the tears from his face.
Really? You're okay with all of what just happened? Oh,
Lily walked around Yuka to look him in the face. His eyes were puffy and red, and his hands and face were wet with tears. Shorter than him, even when he was kneeling down, sitting on his feet, Lily stepped up onto his thigh and looked him in the eye. She reached one of her wings up and wiped some of his tears with her thumb, and he looked down to meet her gaze. She smiled lightly at him and spoke.
Of course I am. Those moans were genuine, you know. I'll be honest.
She looked to the side nervously.
I've wanted to do something like that with you for quite a while. And I finished.
She craned her neck around to try and look at the cum on her back, before turning back to look Yuka in the eyes again.
Well, I call that a fair trade.
She gave him an exaggerated wink.
I won't hold it against you.
Yuka was at a loss for words. He looked into Lily's eyes, stunned. Relief flooded through him as it became clear he hadn't truly screwed things up like he thought, mixed with an equal amount of hope. As he processed her words, how long had she wanted to do something like that? Did she also have feelings for him? And he was completely missing it the whole time? He opened his mouth to speak, but still unable to find what to say. All he got out was,
how long?
Lily averted her eyes nervously again, knowing she'd have to explain the extent of her desire for Yuka.
Well, to be completely honest, I've wanted physical contact of that sort since we first met.
She chuckled nervously.
But at that time, I could tell you weren't interested, so I sort of gave up. But, well, recently, the way you've been acting and all, I thought I'd give it another go.
She met his bewildered gaze again and smiled despite herself.
And now I'm very glad I did.
Her words continued to stun Yuka.
How Wait, what?
No, that's fine. It's Yuka.
How I've been acting? Wait, what? Wait, where's the text though? Is it here? Wait, you mean to tell me you've noticed how I felt recently?
Lily rolled her eyes playfully at the oblivious lizard.
Please, what do you take me for? I don't think you could have made it more obvious. You turn into a babbling mess when you talk to me for any length of time, and don't think I don't notice it when you stare at me longingly when you think I can't see you. You're not very good at hiding your feelings, you know?
Yuka felt heat rushing to his face as he looked at Lily, embarrassed now at how he'd been acting. He wished she had just told him, but realized the irony in that, seeing as he hadn't mustered the courage to do it himself. Perhaps she was just as nervous and confused as he was, the thought of which relaxed him somewhat.
Well, I feel a bit foolish now. Huh.
He glanced nervously to the side before continuing.
But lately, I don't know if you've already figured this out, or if I've made it clear already, but I really do love you. It's not some fleeting crush, or some, like, purely lust-driven feeling. I love you. with all my heart. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Laylee. That's how I feel.
He let out a sigh, nervous as to how Laylee might react to his confession, but relieved to finally have it off his chest. It was Laylee's turn to take pause. She hadn't really considered the gravity of Yuka's supposed crush. She just saw it as an opportunity to gain intimacy with him. But staring into his eyes, she knew his words were true. This was no passing harmless crush or some hormone-fueled lust. Just trying to get his rocks off, Yuka was deeply in love. She thought over it as their eyes stayed locked for a handful of moments. She thought of their travels together, the hardships they'd faced together, and their settling down there into Shipwreck Creek together. She didn't realize truly how close they had become. He was the most constant thing in her life, and when she thought of that, pursuing a romantic relationship with him would be like, it just felt right. Like that's exactly how things should be. She gazed deep into his eyes, feeling closer to him now than ever before. She could feel a swirling mix of anxiety and anticipation within them, but most of all she could feel his love for her, and she realized there was no one else in the world she'd rather be with.
Oh, Yuka!
She wrapped her free wing around one of his hands.
I had no idea it was this serious. Now I'm the one who feels a bit foolish for going so quickly with this.
She closed her eyes and took a deep breath to steady herself.
But Yuka, I think I love you too. If it hadn't really occurred to me before, but I really could not see myself living my life without you.
She opened her eyes and looked again at the lizard who had taken her heart, hope blooming in her eyes now. She smiled again at him, certain in her feelings now. Yuka's heart swooned. He beamed back at the bad girl standing on his thigh and squeezed her wing in his hand tightly.
You have no idea how much it means for me to hear that, Laylee.
He felt tears coming to his eyes again, born now out of love and joy.
It's been really weighing on me recently. Thinking about I was going to tell you, and if you'd even feel the same way. It just feels
I was
good
distorting.
to finally have that off my chest.
He extricated his hand from her wing and brought it to the side of her face, cupping her cheek gently.
I am so happy to have you in my life.
It was Laylee's turn to start tearing up. She averted her eyes from Yuka's face, self-conscious about her own emotions flaring up now.
Jeez, now you're making me cry.
She turned her eyes back to him.
But for what it's worth, I am too.
Their gazes held for a span of moments again, neither one wanting to speak up, lest they ruin this moment. A long silence passed, and feeling it became a bit too awkward for him, Yuka was the first to talk again.
So, what now?
Yum!
Yum.
Laylee giggled at her partner's again apparent inexperience.
Well, you could start by kissing me. I mean, a bit of a step down for what we just did, but, you know, it would be nice.
Yuka's heart pounded with renewed vigor.
Oh, okay.
He said dumbly, before leaning in and
Dumbly.
pursuing her lips slightly. He suddenly felt more anxious in this moment than he had at any point earlier. Without the slightest clue about what he was doing, he leaned in until his lips made contact with Laylee's own. Laylee leaned in as well, helping to guide Yuka's untrained lips with her own as their mouths collided. He clumsily smashed his lips into hers, and she smiled into the kiss at his eagerness. She felt his hand move to the back of her head to pull her further into their passionate kiss. Eventually, after seemingly an eternity of their lips locked together, they pulled away. Yuka was blushing red hot and his head spun. The only thing grounding him was Laylee's face held inches in front of him, seemingly lost in a similar trance. Both parted heavily, the air between them almost stifling. Recovering some of his bearings, Yuka managed to speak.
Wow.
My thoughts exactly.
Laylee said between pants.
You're not a bad kisser, you know.
Yuka blushed and turned his head away.
Thanks. You too.
Laylee giggled again.
You know, for a guy who just splooched all over my back, you're pretty shy.
She said, teasingly. Yuka's face flushed a hotter shade of red.
Sorry. I've just never done something like this before.
No need to apologize.
The bad girl giggled again.
That's why I'm here.
Her attention was drawn downward as she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Looking down between Yuka's thighs, she gasped as she laid her eyes on his cock, fully erect and standing proudly. She was too concerned for Yuka earlier to have paid attention to it, and now her eyes traced its length, taking in the side of it. Laylee had, of course, seen Yuka's cock a handful of times over their longer friendship, much like he had her bits. It's not like he wore pants either, though he did have the advantage of his member disappearing inside an internal sheath when not in use. But even when she had been able to see it, it was usually from a distance, spying on him while he bathed or while he was sleeping and covered in shadow. Now, though, she had a full closed view of his twitching, rock-hard shaft. It was colored a bright green, matching that of Yuka's scales. Though unlike those, his cock was visibly smooth, with soft skin more like that on his belly. It was tall and cylindrical, with a prominent ridge towards the top separating the shaft from its head, visible through this foreskin. At the tip... What? At the tip... Yeah, you know, this is now a very detailed description of Yuka's cock, so pay attention, Dario. At the tip, his foreskin was peeled back, just enough to see his glance peeking through, colored a bright red, much like the inside of his mouth, and with a small slit right on the top, still with a trail of cum leading from it down his length. Aside from the details, it was also very, very big. That much Laylee had gathered beforehand, but she didn't quite expect the sheer scale when it was right next to her like this. Even standing on Yuka's thigh, elevated slightly above it, his cock rose up nearly to the middle of her stomach, and it was about a third of the width by her estimate. His balls sat just below the shaft, resting on his thighs. They were large as well, and contained in a wrinkly sack made of the same soft green skin. Her knees felt weak at the sight of the whole package. His cock, much larger than anything she'd ever taken inside her before. Again, this wasn't anything she didn't already expect. Even from the beginning of her desires, Laylee knew that their inherent size difference would pose an issue for doing something like this. Despite this, in all of her fantasies, she had always taken the entire cock, pushed it into her until there was nothing left, his balls colliding with her ass. Now, even as she ogled his massive cock freely and saw with her own eyes the scale of it, she felt no differently. She wanted Yuka's cock inside her, wanted to feel her lover's entire length pulsating while enveloped in her wetness. Noticing Laylee's trance, Yuka followed her fixated gaze. During the kiss, he hadn't realized how hard he'd become again. He'd expected after an orgasm like that his cock would be out for the count for a while, but apparently the organ had different ideas. Suddenly embarrassed again, he made a bashful attempt to cover his member with his hands.
Sorry about that. I didn't think it would be back this quickly.
Laylee chuckled again.
You're really apologizing about this? After what you just did to me with it?
She gently pushed his hands away from the area and he sheepishly obliged. Gingerly, Laylee wrapped a wing around his length, noticing just how rigid the flesh was. She marveled again at its size, becoming aroused at the thought of squeezing it inside her, mixed with a small amount of trepidation.
Good God, Yuka! You never told me you were packing this much. It's gonna be a tight squeeze in there.
Tight squeeze?
Yuka said, surprised.
Wait, Laylee, you're not actually considering...
Oh, I'm well past considering it.
Laylee said with another light chuckle.
I made up my mind, in fact. There's no way we're stopping here. I'd consider that massage just a warm-up, buddy.
Yuka swallowed hard, nervous about going all the way with Laylee. But then he looked into her eyes, saw her desire and love for him, and he relaxed.
I mean, if you really think you can take it,
He took her free wing into his hand.
I'd love to have my first time with you, lady.
She gave him a warm smile.
Ah, you're adorable sometimes, you know that?
She leaned up to plant another small kiss on his lips.
I'm glitched here.
What is it?
Failure.
Look, it's exactly happening in the fanfiction.
Oh my god, he's fucking her!
I can't move anymore.
You then walk to another level.
Okay. Oh
You know,
man.
look, now you're no longer stuck. You have to press twice in a direction.
So I'm going in this hole, but it doesn't work.
She leaned up to plant another small kiss on his lips. Pulling back, her smile shifted into a sultry smirk as she began lightly stroking up and down his shaft with her ring.
Now cut the sappy stuff. I want you to give this tight bad pussy everything you've got, you hear?
Yuka blushed profusely both at Laylee's kiss and her sudden shift in tone, and gasped slightly at the sensation of her wing rubbing against his cock. All he could do was not trusting his voice to work at the moment.
Good.
Laylee said before returning her attention to his cock. She stroked with a little more speed and pressure, prompting a louder gasp and a slight groan from Yuka. A bead of pre-cum formed on the tip, joining the remains of his previous orgasm as it slid down until it hit Laylee's wing, aiding her in her motions.
God, you're so sensitive down there. I mean, coming completely hands-free just from touching me. Either you have a hairpin trigger or I'm just that hard.
She looked back to give Yuka a playful wink.
I'll assume it's the latter. Flattered, by the way.
Yuka gave a self-conscious smile and looked away again, still at a loss for words. His attention was drawn back when he felt something wet land on his thigh. He looked down to see a clear strand of liquid stretching from between Laylee's legs, pooling onto his skin. He was again amazed at just how much Laylee produced when she was turned on. Deciding he should probably return the favor, he extended a finger and brought his hands down towards Laylee's pussy, lightly pressing it to her soft, wet folds. Something about the feeling of her arousal against his finger rekindled some of his confidence.
I could say the same about you. I mean, this.
He glided his finger over her folds and the skin surrounding the area, spreading her moisture around to make his point.
This is just ridiculous.
Laylee gasped herself as his finger unexpectedly made contact, becoming aware of just how aroused she had become again. She couldn't hold back an involuntary moan as he spread her juices around.
I can't control it. Might come in handy though. Cause shit, you're gonna need all the help we can get fitting this in me. Some extra lubrication can't hurt.
Yuka added a second finger over Laylee's entrance, rubbing a bit harder as her juices ran down to pool in the palm of his hand.
That is true. But let's not forget, you were like this before my hands even got near your behind. You'd made a whole puddle before I even saw where it was coming from. My hands must have just been that good.
He gave his own imitation of Laylee's playful wink, smirking.
Flattered, by the way.
Laylee smiled again, flushing a bit as well. She was glad Yuka was starting to tease her a bit on his own. She did adore how shy and bashful he could be, but she really wanted to see his lewder side come out for once. She refocused her attention on Yuka's cock, sighing contentedly and closing her eyes as he rubbed her pussy. Yuka moved in small circles on her folds, continuing to coax an excessive amount of fluid from her. Going further, he easily slipped one of his fingers inside, finding it just as hot and wet as in there as earlier. He explored about knuckle deep, swirling his fingers around inside her. Laylee let out a sharp gasp punctuated by a louder moan as he moved inside her. In retaliation, she tightened her grip on his cock and stroked faster. More pre-cum began to leak from the tip, and she spread it all around his shaft with her wing to aid her stroking. Yuka groaned himself, Laylee's wing so soft against his sensitive shaft. Not one to be outdone, he slipped his second finger inside her, pushing both further in. He massaged the interior walls of her pussy, and more fluids ran down the length of his hand.
Oh! God, Yuka! Those fingers of yours!
Laylee moaned. She instinctively moved her hips along with the rhythm of Yuka's pleasuring. She opened her eyes again to see even more pre-cum streaming out of him. Curious and full of lust, she leaned over top of his cock and opened her mouth, flicking her tongue over his tip and gathering up a good amount of the sticky liquid. She tasted it and found it to be to her liking. What kind of stupid voice is that?
I don't know.
She began to give a steady stream of licks, lapping up his pre-cum as fast as he made it. Yuka gasped as he watched the bad girl lick his tip, feeling jolts of pleasure with each flick of her tongue. He looked at her own juices dripping off his hand and decided he wanted some of his own. He gently removed his fingers from her, prompting a questioning sidelong glance from her. He moved both of his hands to her sides, wrapping them securely around her body, not caring at this point what mixture of fluids he was getting all over. Ever so tenderly, he lifted her up, rotating her around until she was nearly upside down, with her rear by his face and her mouth still above his cock. Laylee made a squeal of surprise as the world spun around her, loosening her wing from Yuka's cock. She was now looking down directly at his tip, glistening from a mix of pre-cum and her saliva, this sight filling nearly her entire field of vision.
This good, Laylee?
Yuka asked before continuing, wanting to make sure he wasn't hurting his small partner.
Holy shit, Yuka! Yuka!
Laylee said, disoriented.
Yeah, we're good.
Despite her bewilderment and disorientation, Laylee found the sensation of Yuka's strong grip on her as he rotated her around unspeakably arousing. The fact that he could just toss her around and manhandle her like this sent involuntary shivers all along her body. Confirming that she was okay, Yuka returned his attention to the reason he pulled this maneuver. He was holding Laylee's pussy inches from his face. My tablet always, goes off after a minute of not touching it, That's why I constantly have to... the screen turns off.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. He could feel the heat radiating from her and the smell was intoxicating. Even more juices flowed from her, running down her stomach now. He couldn't resist. He pursed his lips and pressed them between her legs, mimicking what he did earlier when they kissed. Immediately tasted her on her lips. Slightly sweet and tangy. He opened his mouth wider and made out with her whole, accepting every drop of fluid she produced. Laylee moaned as soon as his mouth made contact. She involuntarily squirmed in his hands, unable to remain still as pleasure coursed through her. She planted her feet on the sides of Yuka's head, steadying herself while pulling him in further. Returning the favor, she reached her tongue out again and licked at the tip of his cock, tasting more of his salty pre-cum. Arcing her neck, she was able to wrap her lips around his tip, stretching her mouth wide to do so. She added a bit of suction as she continued to pleasure him with her tongue. Yuka groaned into Laylee as she put her mouth to use, feeling her wet tongue all over his tip. He responded in kind, pressing his tongue to her entrance. He gave a few licks over her folds before prodding her entrance and slipping it inside. He teased just a bit in, swirling his tongue around while he continued to slurp up her flutes. Laylee stifled a moan on Yuka's cock, his tongue invading her pussy and amplifying her pleasure. She pushed forward as she licked his cock, slowly taking more of his length into her mouth. It was difficult to fit that much in her maw, and she drooled all over, her saliva running down his length. Yuka probed his long tongue deeper inside Laylee, feeling her heat only increased the further he went in. He explored the depths of her pussy, feeling around and pushing against her deepest pleasure areas. Laylee's eyes shut wide open as Yuka pushed inside, deeper than she thought possible. And my tablet went off again. She let out another stifled moan on his cock, drooling more as she absent-mindedly pushed more of his length in, too focused on the pleasure coming from between her legs. Before she knew it, she had nearly half of his cock in her mouth and down her throat, more than she thought she could even handle. Finally, her reflexes caught up to her. She shifted slightly, and Yuka's cock pressed against her throat in the wrong way. She gagged and forced her head up, coughing and spluttering as saliva dripped from her mouth back onto his cock.
Fuck! Yuka! That tongue!
She moaned out once she regained her voice. Feeling she'd done enough with her mouth, she again wrapped a wing around his cock, gliding it up and down, slick with her saliva now. Yuka hardly noticed as Laylee's mouth left his cock, too focused on pleasing her with his tongue. He continued to use the prehensile tongue to its full advantage, probing around deep inside her while drinking up her moisture.
What?
This music kinda sounded a bit like Paper Mario there at the beginning.
Whoa.
Laylee's mouth stayed open, slack-jawed, as she panted and moaned in pleasure. Der Akkustand ist niedrig. Okay. She idly stroked Yuka's cock, feeling another orgasm approaching.
Yuka! Fuck! I'm gonna... Oh!
Yuka redoubled his efforts, wanting to get Laylee over the edge again. He moved his tongue in and out now, thrusting it deep inside her and rubbing against her walls. Laylee's eyes rolled back into her head, her vision going wide with pleasure. She gripped Yuka's cock for support now as her entire body shuddered. With her final thrust from his tongue, she was sent over the edge, a powerful orgasm rippling through her body as she practically screamed with pleasure. She clenched her legs tight on his head, pressing his face firmly to her crotch. Yuka could feel the walls of her pussy clamping down on his tongue as she came, even as he drank up a new flood of moisture. Exactly that part, that sounded like Paper Mario. Yeah. He continued to lick and probe inside of her, lapping up all her juices that he could as the last of her orgasm ran its course. Eventually, as he felt the grip of her legs loosen, he extricated his tongue from her and pulled his face back, his chin, cheeks, lips, and nose soaked with her fluid. He panted hard, not having realized just how limited his breathing was in there. Laylee's entire body went slack as her orgasm faded, very entire from coming so hard. She breathed heavily herself, but between pants and managed to say,
Holy fuck, Yuka! Oh,
Was just a fruit? Died for a
holy
fruit?
shit!
Yuka carefully flipped Laylee back upright, setting her gently on his thighs again, with his hands still supporting her back. She had a dazed look in her eyes, and he briefly worried whether he had pushed her too far.
Are you okay, Laylee? Was that too much for you?
Laylee looked back into his eyes and smiled, feeling herself come back down to earth.
Oh, too much? Never! That was perfect, Yuka!
She looked down to see Yuka's cock, still hard between them, throbbing and perfectly upright.
Oh my, you're still so hard! Sorry about that. I couldn't focus on pleasing this thing with that tongue of yours embedded in me.
Don't worry about it.
Yuka reassured her.
I think I enjoyed having my tongue in you more anyways, haha.
Oh, how sweet!
Laylee giggled. She lazily wrapped her wing around his length again, the flesh as firm to the touch as ever.
But I think you deserve another release. It's only fair. I believe I'm warmed up plenty. How about we finally do this for real?
She gave him a lewd smirk while she idly stroked him up and down. Yuka couldn't contain a groan of pleasure, realizing just how worked up he was again. Then he flushed at her words, glancing away as he spoke.
You are still serious about that?
Oh wait.
Laylee, I don't know how I'm even gonna fit inside you. Would it hurt?
Laylee scoffed. Laylee scoffed.
Please, where's your sense of adventure?
When he continued to look away nervously, she took his hands with her free wing, squeezing it lightly to comfort him.
Hey, if it makes you feel better, I'll start on top, so I can have full control of how deep you're going, okay? I promise I'll be careful.
Yuka looked back towards Laylee, seeing a pleading look in her eyes. How could he say no to that face? He took a deep breath, squeezed her wing back, and smiled.
Okay,
He said, less nervous than before.
but remember, if it gets too big, too much for you, tell me and we can stop. Put your comfort first, okay?
Laylee nodded enthusiastically.
You've got it! Now, how about we go somewhere where you can get a bit more comfortable? And I'll show you just exactly what this pussy can do.
She gave him another one of her lewd smirks before unwrapping her wing from his cock and stepping off of him. She nearly stumbled a few steps, still weak from their previous experience, but she managed to make a sultry waltz towards one of the nearby rocks, thinking it perfect for Yuka to lay his back against while she was on top of him. Yuka got to his feet and followed Laylee in a nearly trance-like state, unable to resist the sight of her cum-covered backside and swaying hips. She led him over to the large rock formation that had made their activities private this whole time. She turned to face him again, and once he got close enough, she gestured for him to sit down against the rock. He mindlessly obliged, sitting with his back propped up against a smooth stretch of stone, looking almost eye to eye now with Laylee. She smirked at him.
Good boy!
She teased, before stepping up onto his thighs again, straddling his cock now. She craned her neck up and stood on her tiptoes, pursing her lips. Yuka got the hint and leaned his head down until their lips met, and Laylee wrapped her wings around his head to pull him into another passionate kiss. Yuka's hands instinctively went to her body, rubbing along her fur and feeding her up as their lips stayed locked and the tongues wrapped around each other. He felt lightheaded, pent up, his cock twitching with anticipation. All these feelings exacerbated by making out with the girl whom he loved most. His hand settled on her ass, again groping and kneading at the soft flesh. They were reluctant to part their lips when their kiss finally ended, staring deep into each other's eyes. Yuka felt his heart thumping wildly within his chest, as well as the lighter sensation of Laylee's own heart pounding away, her chest pressed up against him. He brought a hand up from her rear to lightly cup her cheek, smiling warmly at her. Are you?
What? Oh, I actually paid attention to the game. Wait, hold on.
What?
You're gorgeous, lady.
He whispered to her. Though already pretty flustered from their kiss, Laylee's face flushed an even deeper shade of red at such a candid compliment. She looked away, stammering,
God! Knock it out with this sappy stuff!
Yuka simply chuckled, amused at how easy it was to fluster Laylee with any romantic language at all.
Oh, right. You don't do well. You don't do too well with that kind of stuff, huh? Well then, shall we
you,
move on
Batman.
and do something that's apparently more comfortable for you? Like impaling yourself on some lizard cock that's half as tall as you?
Laylee turned back to
The
Yuka,
fuck?
smiling widely now.
Now you're speaking my language!
She leaned in for a quick, enthusiastic peck on his lips, directing her attention downwards. With one foot on either of his thighs, Laylee was straddling his cock, standing hard and proud between her legs. Only having to squat down a little bit, she lightly kissed his tip with her pussy, rubbing it around and leaving behind some of her juices. She let out a light breathing moan as her slit glided over his tip. Stopping her motions, she settled her pussy down, centered on Yuka's tip. She looked back into his eyes as she brought her wings to his arms, steadying herself.
Ready, big boy?
She asked, her heart still beating fast within her chest. Yuka simply nodded, settling his own hands on Laylee's sides. He leaned in for a quick peck of his own, trying to ease his nerves and his own racing heart. Taking in a deep breath, Laylee pushed herself down. Slowly she felt her lips part as the tip of Yuka's cock entered her. She grit her teeth as he stretched her open wide, breathing out through her nose as she forced herself further down. Inch after inch, Yuka's cock slowly disappeared inside her. She let out an involuntary groan as she felt her insides stretching wider and wider to accommodate. She was delighted to find that her earlier comment about her juices was proving itself to be true, as they did indeed serve quite well as lubrication for stuffing Yuka inside her. Yuka watched in silent surprise as Laylee sank lower, already deeper than he'd expected her to get. She was just as wet and warm inside as he'd felt with his tongue and fingers, a sensation even more heavenly on his sensitive cock. He resisted the natural instinct to buck his hips and really bury himself inside her, still concerning about hurting her. Laylee pushed herself further and further down, stretching herself out until she physically couldn't take anymore. She felt as if she had hit a wall, the entrance to a womb blocking Yuka's cock from proceeding further. As his tip lightly brushed the sensitive nerve endings of her cervix, she shivered. More pleasure coming from the area than she could ever expect. She stopped, keeping her breath steady with deep inhales through her nose and long exhales out of her mouth. Oh my god, this music! This music is kinda unfitting with the fanfiction.
Alright.
She looked down and was mildly disappointed to see she had only managed to fit about half of Yuka's length inside her. What did raise her spirits, however, and what sent a lurid thrill through her was the prominent bulge now in her belly, the faint outline of his cock visible. She curiously poked at the protrusion with the tip of her wing, pushing on it until she could feel Yuka's member shift inside her, prompting a drawn-out moan from her as he rubbed against her cervix.
Holy fuck, Yuka! You're stretching me out! Even more than I expected!
Yuka stared at the bulge too, amazed at how pronounced it was through the soft fur on her tummy. He could feel it too, the walls of her tight pussy clamping down on him from every angle, his dick in a suffocating wet heat.
Yeah, it feels super tight in there. Are you okay, Laylee? I don't have to go any further. If you don't think you can take it.
Yeah, I'm fine. It does feel really good, I promise. I just need to get used to it. That's all.
Laylee stammered out. She closed her eyes and felt her muscles trembling slightly as she held her position, mentally preparing herself to start moving again. With every slight shift of her body, Yuka's cock rubbed against what felt like every nerve she had inside her, sending intense and eerie pangs of pleasure throughout her whole body. She sensed that she had gone far enough farther than anyone in her situation would reasonably go, yet she was determined to go even further. Once her bearings were about her again, Laylee slowly, with wobbling knees, pushed herself back up, feeling some resistance from the sheer tightness of her walls, gripping onto Yuka's cock with surprising force. She groaned as her insides shifted back to their regular place, feeling oddly empty now. She stood up until just his tip was inside her again, before taking a deep breath and pushing back down. It was a smoother process the second time around, as Laylee easily slid down onto Yuka's behemoth dick, letting out a pleasured moan this time. Getting down to around the same depth before Yuka was again prodding at her womb's entrance, she slid herself back up, glad that she could not now simply enjoy herself. She settled into an easy rhythm, moving her hips up and down, fully utilizing the half of his cock she could fit inside her. She moaned as loud as ever, his cock kissing her cervix every time she set herself down and sending a nearly electric burst of pleasure throughout her. Yuka grit his teeth and tightened his grasp on Laylee's hips as she rode him, her tight walls tugging on his cock with every movement. He couldn't fully resist his instincts, gently rocking his hips along with Laylee's, adding some force to his cock going into her. Despite the pleasure coursing through her, Laylee quickly grew fatigued on top of Yuka's cock. The muscles in her legs burned as she continued to push herself up and down, feeling sweat start to trickle down her neck. Sorry.
Got trolled again.
Her tongue lolled out of her mouth as a steady series of pants joined her moans. In her rising lethargy, as she was pushing herself back up, her feet clumsily slipped off of Yuka's thighs, causing her to lose her balance. With nothing supporting her, she lurched downwards, quickly sliding down onto Yuka's cock. She passed right by the halfway point where she had been comfortably hovering, slipping down almost an entire inch further than that. She felt as his tip was shoved against her womb with her body's entire weight on it, straining against her sensitive cervix. The sensation was too much for her to take, both the pressure against such a sensitive area and being stretched even further than before. She scrambled to regain her footing, gasping breathlessly, knowing this was too far for her to handle right now. She managed to push herself back up until only Yuka's tip remained inside her. Trembling and with her heart pounding from the experience, Yuka, watching this interaction take place, helped in lifting Laylee up, panicking that he'd gone too far in.
Oh my god. Laylee, are you okay?
Laylee took a few deep breaths to calm herself back down, assessing her current situation. Luckily, she felt no pain, but the extension both from riding him and then from scrambling to get back up left her weak and shaky.
Yeah, it just slipped. You need to...
My tablet shut down now because no
Do you need to stop here or what?
No, it's fine. It's just standby. I just charge it real quick. I'm gonna charge it with my power bank.
But I thought you used the power bank for the TV.
Well, now I'm using it for this.
No. Why is that portal? It's almost done with it.
You failed miserably.
I blame the portal. I was almost done, then I touched it.
But you deliberately did that on purpose. It was right there.
No.
Yes, it did.
No,
I'll go to the toilet real quick.
You jumped
Let
on
me get
that
the last-
portal.
Get me the last coin. You can go inside again, of course. You just get saving. What's the speed one again? Speed one. Now I can hear myself. What? Didn't even touch me. I call this touching.
Yeah!
I got crushed before, even though it didn't touch me.
Crushed?
It touched his feet and the other died.
American megatrends.
How's that bad timing? Of course, let's touch.
Ah. There you go, I'm back. Luckily she felt no pain, but the exertion both from riding him and then from scrambling to get back up left her weak and shaky.
Yeah, just slip. We need to swap. I can't keep going like this.
She panted out.
Are you sure?
Yuka asked, hesitant to take over so soon. If she had slipped and gone too far on the accident so easily, how could he be trusted to not do the same to her?
I don't know, Lily. What if I hurt you?
Don't hurt me. Don't hurt me.
Wait.
No more.
There you go. Laylee pulled herself up all the way, letting out a last moan as Yuka's cock slipped out of her pussy's tight grasp and slapped back against her stomach. She could feel as her insides settled back into their correct places, getting reaccustomed to not having Yuka inside her. She brought her wings from his arms up to his face, looking into his eyes as she spoke.
I trust you, Yuka. Really? Please, the feeling of you inside me, it's incredible. Oh, I want more of it.
Her words relaxed Yuka, though he couldn't hold back a smirk at how she pleaded for him.
Oh yeah? You want more?
He teased her, leaning in closer and dropping his voice to a whisper.
Oops. You want me to pin you down the ground? To trust into you? And hit myself inside that tight pussy of yours?
Laylee shivered as Yuka told her exactly what she wanted. She simply bit her lip and nodded in response, knowing anything she said wouldn't come close to matching the intensity and lust in his voice. She made a mental note to tell him that he should talk dirty to her more. Still a bit nervous, but wanting to keep up his confident facade, Yuka tightened his grasp on Laylee and once again lifted her up. He shifted to the side, placing her body gently in the grass as he rolled over onto his knees. He was looming over the top of her now, his glistening cock hovering over her stomach. Laylee looked up at him, towering over her, heart beating wildly with lust. His sheer size over her, his hands gripping her sides, his cock still throbbing, and a look in his eyes that she'd never seen before. She shivered again. From all her years of knowing him, this is what she had always desired. Starting to really feel the confidence he'd put on, Yuka wasted no time before shifting his hips back and lining up his cock with Laylee's entrance. He pressed his tip against her moist folds, preparing himself to enter back into her. He looked down into her eyes as he settled into position, seeing the lust and desire in them. He couldn't hold back another smirk at the sight before him.
Ready, Laylee?
She nodded, bringing her wings up to wrap around Yuka's arms. Bracing herself, she took in a deep breath as she felt his hips start to move. Yuka pushed in slowly, separating Laylee's folds easier this time as his head slipped inside her. He let out an involuntary groan as the now familiar wetness and tightness of her pussy constricted around his cock. Moving his hips slowly yet still with the force needed to get inside, he once again landed about halfway inside before finding it much more difficult to go further.
Now we can do it.
Yuka, watching this interaction take place, helped in lifting Laylee up, panicking that he'd gone too far in.
No.
Oh, my God, Laylee, are you okay?
Laylee took a few deep breaths to calm herself back down, assessing her current situation. Luckily, she felt no pain, but the exertion both from riding him and then from scrambling to get back up left her weak and shaky.
Yeah, it just slipped. Ready to swap. I can't keep going like this.
She panted out.
Are you sure?
Yuka asked, hesitant to take over so soon. If she had slipped and gone too far on accident so easily, how could he be trusted to not do the same to her?
I don't know, Laylee. What if I hurt you?
Laylee pulled herself up all the way, letting out the last moan as Yuka's cock slipped out of her pussy's tight grasp and slapped back against his stomach. She could feel as her insides settled back into their correct places, getting reaccustomed to not having Yuka inside her. She brought her wings from his arms up to his face, looking into his eyes as she spoke.
I trust you, Yuka. Really, please. The feeling of you inside me, it's incredible. I want more of it.
Her words relaxed Yuka, though he couldn't hold back a smirk at how she pleaded for him.
Oh, yeah?
You want more?
Oh my god, that was so silly. He teased her, leaning in closer and dropping his voice to a whisper.
You want me to pin you down to the ground, to trust into you, and hilt myself inside that tight pussy of yours?
Actually, I need to whisper. Laylee shivered as Yuka told her exactly what she wanted. She simply bit her lip and nodded in response, knowing anything she said wouldn't come close to matching the intensity and lust in his voice. She made a mental note to tell him that he should talk dirty to her more. Still a bit nervous. But, wait a minute. But wanting to keep up this confident facade, Yuka tightened his grasp on Laylee and once again lifted her up. He shifted to the side, placing her body gently in the grass as he rolled over onto his knees. He was looming over top of her now, his glistening cock hovering over her stomach. Laylee looked up at him, towering over her, heart beating wildly with lust. His sheer size over her, his hands gripping her sides, his cock still throbbing, and a look in his eyes that she'd never seen before. She shivered again. From all her years of knowing him, this is what she'd always desired. Starting to really feel the confidence he'd put on, Yuka wasted no time before shifting his hips back and lining up his cock with Laylee's entrance. He pressed his tip again against her moist folds, preparing himself to enter back into her. He looked down into her eyes as he settled into position. Seeing the lust and desire in them, he couldn't hold back another smirk at the sight before him.
Ready, Laylee?
She nodded, bringing her wings up to wrap around Yuka's arms. Bracing herself, she took in a deep breath as she felt his hips start to move. Yuka pushed in slowly, separating Laylee's folds easier this time as his head slipped inside her. He let out an involuntary groan as the now familiar wetness and tightness of her pussy constricted around his cock. Moving his hips slowly yet still with the force needed to get inside, he once again landed about halfway inside before finding it much more difficult to go further. Laylee gripped her wings tighter against Yuka's arms as he entered her, still not quite used to the stretching sensation as her walls parted ways to allow him inside. Even still, she revealed in the pleasure coming from him being inside her again, letting herself really enjoy the ride this time and not have to worry about being on top. Yuka stopped at the halfway point, idly rocking his hips back and forth, finding the pleasure of Laylee's pussy too much to hold his movements outright. He teased a bit forwards, considering...
Hey, Laylee.
I think you got some more room in here.
Oh,
But if I try and fit a little more in...
he asked. Laylee could already feel him pushing up against her group again, but she couldn't resist the thought of getting more of him inside her. Glad that he was getting into it as well. She nodded enthusiastically.
God, yes, please.
Okay,
Yuka said, gripping Laylee's sides a bit tighter.
I'll go slowly. Tell me to stop as soon as it gets to be too much, okay?
He waited for another nod from her, feeling her wings tighten as well against his arms before he continued. With careful and deliberate movements, Yuka slowly arced his hips forward, pulling Laylee's body gently towards him at the same time. He could still feel resistance going forwards, but he could see as his cock ever so slowly made its way farther inside her. Laylee's breath caught in her throat as he slid deeper into her, occupying more space inside her than she even knew she had. He pushed. Oh, this stupid voice. He pushed, strained against her cervix, the sensation almost overstimulating. Only slightly regaining her breath, it came in irregular gasps, too tense to breathe normally. Yuka could feel the muscles in her sides clenching and could see her legs straining against the ground as he slowly made headway, finding it more difficult the more she tensed. He stopped momentarily.
Laylee, relax. Take a deep breath.
He said in a calming voice. He made an exaggerated inhale sound, motioning for her to follow him. After she did, he motioned out, and they released their breaths together before he continued.
Stop clenching so hard.
Focus on your relaxing your muscles, one by one. It'll make it easier going in. I promise.
Is that on purpose that you're changing your voice?
Yes, it is.
Nodding, Laylee closed her eyes, focusing on keeping her breaths deep and steady. Starting from her legs, she mentally forced each muscle going up to relax. As she loosened her chest muscles, she felt her breath come easier, and Yuka's cock didn't feel quite as tightly squeezed inside her. She felt her body sit gentler against the grass, and she breathed out an easygoing sigh.
Thanks, Yuka. It feels much better now.
He smiled.
No problem. Just looking out for your comfort, like I promised.
He could feel as well the loosening of her muscles, finding himself not quite as constricted inside her.
Want me to continue?
Laylee nodded eagerly.
Oh yes, you're not done quite yet.
She said, shifting slightly into a more comfortable position.
I dare say we might actually pull this off. I can't wait to feel your ball slipping against my ass as you help me fully.
Yuka's smile twisted into a lewd smirk.
Oh, yes. You're not done quite yet.
What?
Oh, wait, what?
I think you were on the wrong
Oh,
part.
wait, sorry. Wow. Wait, where am I now? Wow, you
Wow,
really want this. Wow, you really want this, don't you?
He retightened his grasp on her body as he prepared to give her what she wanted.
Well, it'd be rude to keep you waiting. Here goes.
He shifted his hips forward once again, resuming his slow slide into Laylee. As expected, he found a little less resistance, making good headway. He passed right by the 3/4 mark, beginning to think as well that this might actually be doable. He watched the bulge in her stomach grow, while it was pushed up along her stomach further and further, placing a thumb over it to feel it shifting inside her. Laylee focused her best on keeping her body relaxed and her breathing, even while she felt Yuka filling her up even further. The pressure on her cervix was constant, sending wild signals of bliss as she shoved against it. Not even just stretching out horizontally, she could feel her inside stretching up. Yuka's slow, steady force created more room for himself. He closed his eyes in concentration as he pushed in, gritting his teeth as just how tight Laylee was, getting only tighter as more fur was wrapped around his cock. But, eventually, before he even knew it, he could feel the soft fur on her thighs tickling his own, as he found there was nothing more to push inside. He opened his eyes to see his suspicions confirmed, as there wasn't a trace of his length to be seen down between her legs, the only thing betraying its existence being that of the outline running along Laylee's stomach.
Holy shit!
He gasped out, amazed at the sight before him. Laylee opened her eyes as well and glanced down to see the same dizzying sight. Every hard, solid inch of Yuka's length was packed in tightly, pushing against her tight walls. She was thankful that they'd finally made it, and she wasn't sure if she could even take half an inch more.
Fuck! Yes! I told ya! I knew we'd make it! God! Oh, God! Luca, if you'd so... fucking big!
Yuka smirked at that, regaining some of his confidence.
Well, aren't you a flatterer?
He said, lightly rubbing along the bulge in Laylee's stomach with his thumb.
Now that we're in, are you ready for the real action?
She bit her lip and nodded.
Please!
With a deep breath, Yuka pulled his hips back slowly as he entered, feeling the walls of Laylee's pussy tugging at his cock as it emerged from her once more. Her lips were stretched outward, clinging tightly to his girth while he retracted. He couldn't suppress another groan. The tightness of her pussy, pleasing his cock and practically making him see stars. Laylee was in a similar state, trying to get used to the still strange sensation of her walls shifting back as his cock left her, rubbing against them as he did and sending even more waves of pleasure throughout her. Once he'd pulled his hips back a fair amount, seeing the bulge in Laylee's stomach nearly disappear, Yuka pushed back in after a brief moment, again straining against the tightness of her walls, though with notably less resistance this time. He pushed until he was balls deep again, before repeating the process. Laylee's eyes rolled back into her head as Yuka started to slowly fuck her, repeatedly stretching her out and hitting her with each delicate thrust. Just having him inside her was almost overwhelmingly pleasurable, but the sensation of him moving as well drove her quickly to the edge. Moans and gasps escaped her lips with ease, unable to do anything else but enjoy the pleasure. Getting used to the motions, Yuka sped up his thrusts, gripping Laylee's body tight and pulling her into him as he went. He moved almost automatically, driven by the feeling of her walls clamping onto him, milking his shaft like nothing he'd ever felt before. He lifted Laylee off the ground slightly, pushing into her and pulling her into his thrusts, like she was just some toy being used for his pleasure. Her vision went wide as Yuka picked up the pace, not able to think straight with his meat using her like this. Through the haze of her pleasure, though, she could feel his balls swinging up with his thrusts, lightly smacking against her soft cheeks, just like she'd teased about earlier. That sensation only added to her lust. Yuka lifted his small, bad companion fully off the ground as his thrusts became even more powerful and fast, fucking into her with nearly primal lust. He was mesmerized by the way his cock disappeared into her, pushing up a lump in her belly before coming out and making it go away, and the heat, the sheer fire seemingly burning deep within her loins was heavenly on his shaft. He felt his peak rapidly approaching again.
Laylee! Fuck! I can't go back! Much longer!
He groaned out, panting with exertion between his words. Lady was in a similar state, with Yuka's girth grinding against her walls, each thrust pushing against her womb with a particularly strong burst of pleasure. She too was feeling yet another climax going on.
Me too!
She managed to blurt out between her gasps and moans.
Oh, give it to me! Give it to me! I want all of it! Ah.
Laylee's lewd words were enough for Yuka to be sent over the edge again. His thrusts became irregular and frantic as he felt a familiar pressure build up between his legs before he finally pushed deep into her and blew his fucking load! He sent forth a powerful blast of his seed into the very depths of the pussy, his legs trembling with the pleasure and effort of it. Laylee could feel Yuka trembling inside her as he came, the feeling enough for her to reach climax with him. She arched her back as intense waves of fiery pleasure washed over her, squirming in Yuka's grasp. She screamed out in bliss, feeling the warmth of his cum beginning to blossom deep inside her. Yuka grit his teeth as he took slow, pounding thrusts into Laylee, while his orgasm continued, painting her insides with more strong blasts of cum.
Laylee!
He groaned, his whole body shuddering now. Laylee felt Yuka's cock pulsing inside her, pouring his cum into her small insides. It already felt like it had filled up every space it could, leaking down along Yuka's cock and beginning to overflow outside. But his seed kept coming, every rope pushing against her cervix and amplifying her pleasure as her orgasm ran its course. She felt its warmth push its way further inside her as, with nowhere else to go, Yuka's seed found its way into her womb, the passionate fire burning all throughout her body, preventing her from considering what that feeling could mean. Yuka's thrusts became weaker and slower as his climax dwindled away, leaking a few more drops of cum into Laylee as he hilted her one last time and leaned over her, out of breath from the exertion. Seeing the pleasure fade from her own face, he smiled and set her gently in the grass, bringing a hand up to caress her cheek. Laylee let her head rest back into the soft grass, panting heavily herself as she felt the last vestiges of her own orgasm leave her. She smiled lazily, the warmth of Yuka's sticky cum settling inside her pleasant. She opened her eyes as she felt the soft touch of his hand, seeing an equal expression of afterglow on his face.
Ha! You did, pretty well for your first time, Buck Breath.
She teased.
Thanks.
He said, blushing a bit as the reality of what they just did started to sink in.
I'm glad it was with you.
He looked down to where his girth was still lodged inside her, seeing as his cum began to seep slowly out of her. A thought occurred to him, then, that sent his mind into a subdued panic.
Hey, Laylee. We're not compatible, right?
Laylee followed his gaze, beginning to think clearer as well.
Well, can't say I know any other lizard-bat couples, and certainly not any with children of their own. But I wouldn't think two such different species would have the ability to procreate.
She watched as more of Yuka's cum trickled out of her, giggling slightly to herself.
I'd say you give it a damn good try, though, and hey, if you actually can, do that.
She said, looking back into his eyes.
Well, I don't think I could ask for a better lizard to have children with.
She thought that he might have gotten Laylee pregnant had terrified Yuka, but as she spoke and held his gaze with her expression full of love, he felt his panic subside. He realized that he, too, couldn't ask for a better mother for his children.
Me too. As unlikely as it is, I'd want to raise kids with no one other than but you, Laylee.
She smiled broader at his words. Feeling a flutter of emotion inside her, she closed her eyes and pursued her lips pursed her lips slightly, goddammit, waiting expectantly. Yuka smiled lightly and leaned in, pressing his lips against hers. He snaked a hand back behind her head, pulling her again into a long, passionate kiss. Slipping his long tongue into her mouth, he wrapped it around hers, basking in his afterglow as they made out. After another eternity of their lips being locked together, Yuka pulled away, a broad, satisfied smile on his face. Lily returned a similar glowing smile.
God.
God, what did I do to deserve you?
I
Where's
could
this
ask
place?
the same question.
Yuka said breathlessly. He returned his attention to where his cock was deflating slightly inside her, laying out even more of his seed.
Oh man. Now I lost my sight. Where am I now?
Brace yourself, I'm pulling out now. That's what you need to say.
Where is this? I'm putting on now.
He said, gripping her side with a bit more force in preparation to pull back. Lily nodded before she felt Yuka slide slowly out of her as he pulled his hips back. She groaned as his still quite large member rubbed against her sensitive walls, bringing with it a flood of cum. After some surprisingly still strong resistance, Yuka extricated his legs out of Lily's used hole, watching as a renewed torrent of his seed came gushing out of her, pooling into the grass below. He was momentarily impressed at the size of his own load.
Wow, Laylee. How'd you get fit all that inside you?
It would bring the magic if I told you now, wouldn't it?
She responded with a wink. Taking a few moments to recover her breath and tentatively flex a few of her muscles, Laylee unsteadily planted her wings on the ground and pushed herself up. The motion lethargic through her exhaustion. She got up onto her feet, only to immediately teeter over forward as her sore legs trembled below her. Yuka quickly caught Laylee with his hands as she fell towards him, lifting her up and supporting her weight.
Whoa there. Lose your balance?
She smiled towards him sheepishly.
Sorry, didn't realize how spent my legs would be. I don't think I'm gonna be able to walk straight for a few days.
Yuka hoisted her up to eye level, smiling at her.
I'll take that as a compliment to my performance. Though, to be honest, I'm feeling a bit weak myself.
He looked down, seeing his slick, deflating member and feeling the drying cum on Laylee's back.
And a bit sticky. Shall we find somewhere to wash up?
Laylee nodded.
Oh yes, and then maybe we can do some actual resting afterwards.
Yuka playfully perked an eyebrow at her.
Oh? I thought you'd be asking for round 2.
Laylee smiled broadly.
Silly lizard, that comes after we rest up.
She winked at him.
I may be sore, but we still got the whole day ahead of us, and there's no way we're ending it before you pump another load into me.
Yuka couldn't help from blushing, still surprised at how much libido his small partner was full of. He shook his head.
With the way you're talking, how are we ever going to find the time to feed capital B?
Laylee simply laughed at his words, prompting him to join her. Once their laughing fit had died down, Yuka's, still giggling lightly and with very sticky fingers, set his bad partner gently in her usual perch atop his head. He got to his own feet, feeling a similar weakness in his knees and exhaustion throughout his body. Nonetheless, he set out, away from the shielding comfort of the rock formation, leaving behind nothing but a few puddles, marking this occasion in search of somewhere to clean up. A smile was still painting on his face, and he let out an easy sigh as he walked, comforted simply by the presence of his lover resting on his head. Though she knew she'd be needing to leave shortly, Laylee's eyelids unwittingly drooped as she relaxed into her perch, quickly beginning to doze like she often did in this spot. By this time, in her half-asleep state, the only feelings swirling throughout her were how content she was to finally have all she ever wanted with the lizard below her. The end. Notes. Initially started writing this as a quick one-shot to take a break on my main longer fic. 6 months and nearly 40k words later, it's finally done. Definitely took a lot longer than I had planned, but now that it's done, I'm excited to continue working on other stuff. I'll give this a kudos. What?
Wow.
Only 3 people left a kudos. Like me and 2 others. I guess ukulele fanfictions aren't too popular. There's one
Well, I mean-
comment. It says, reading a ukulele porn fanfic was not on my 2023 bingo.
Wow.
Oh, that was actually written not too long ago. 19th November.
What?
Yeah.
What?